simple hug from a kind waitress touches a silent boy's heart and aware that his billionaire father is watching, ready to change her life forever. The morning air was cold outside, and the small roadside diner smelled of coffee and fresh pancakes. Inside, the sound of sizzling bacon and soft country music filled the air. Clara Jensen moved quickly between tables, her hair tied up, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and a small, tired smile on her face. She had been working at this diner for years, always starting her shift before sunrise. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid her bills and helped her look after her sick mother back home. She knew the regular truck drivers, farmers, a few old couples who came every morning for breakfast and a bit of talk. Before their long days, that morning felt just like any other. She wiped down the counter, refilled the sugar jars, and poured hot coffee for a group of men talking about the weather. Outside, she could see the sun just beginning to rise, coloring the sky in soft orange and pink. She thought about how beautiful it was, but quickly pushed the thought away. Beauty didn't pay rent. Around 8 a.m., the diner's door opened, and a gust of cold air rushed in. Clara looked up, ready to greet whoever it was with her usual cheerful voice. A tall man in an expensive dark suit stepped inside, holding the hand of a small boy. The man looked out of place in the humble diner. His shoes were polished, and his watch shone even in the dull morning light. The boy beside him looked around quietly, his face pale and blank, his small hand holding a stuffed bear. Clara gave them her warmest smile. "Good morning. 2 for breakfast?" she asked. The man nodded politely but didn't smile. He seemed distracted, as if his mind was somewhere else. They followed her to a corner booth by the window. When Clara handed them the menus, she noticed that the boy never looked up. He just sat there, staring at the table, clutching his bear tightly. "What would you like, sweetheart?" she asked softly. No answer. The man cleared his throat and said, "He's not much of a talker." His voice was deep, calm but tired. "We'll just take some pancakes, scrambled eggs, and orange juice." Clara nodded and went to the kitchen. Something about the boy stuck in her mind. She'd seen hundreds of customers come and go, but rarely one so quiet, so lost. Most kids his age were noisy, curious, or at least hungry. This one looked like he was carrying something heavy inside his little heart. While the cook prepared their food, Clara glanced back at the table. The man, who she guessed was the boy's father, was busy on his phone, typing quickly, barely looking up. The boy sat completely still. His small shoulders slumped forward, and his eyes stared at the syrup bottle like it was something he couldn't understand. Clara's heart ached a little. When the food was ready, she brought it over, setting the plates down carefully. "Here you go. Pancakes, hot off the grill," she said brightly. Still no reaction. The man muttered a quick thank you without looking away from his phone. Clara poured coffee for him and smiled at the boy again. "You like pancakes, honey? These are special, or cook makes them with a secret ingredient. It's love," she whispered playfully. But the boy didn't even blink. Clara stepped back, unsure what to do. It wasn't her place to interfere, but she couldn't help feeling sad. The boy looked like he wanted to disappear. She watched for a while as the man took a few bites and scrolled through his phone. The boy didn't touch his food. A few minutes later, one of the older regulars joked from the counter, "Clara, you running a daycare now?" He chuckled, but Clara didn't laugh. She turned toward him and smiled politely, but her mind was elsewhere. Something told her that this child needed a little kindness, even if it was just from a stranger for a few minutes. When she noticed the boy staring at the syrup again, an idea came to her. She picked up the syrup bottle, came over to their table, and knelt beside him. "Do you know what's fun?" she said in a gentle voice. The boy didn't answer. She squeezed a little syrup on his plate, drawing a small smiley face. "Look, he's happy to see you." The boy's eyes moved slowly to the plate. For a second, she thought she saw a spark of curiosity. Then he looked up at her. Just for a heartbeat, his eyes met hers. Clara smiled, her heart warming. "See? He's smiling because you're special," she said softly. The boy blinked, then looked down again. This time he reached for the spoon. Across the table, the man had finally put down his phone. He was watching quietly now, something changing in his expression. He didn't interrupt, didn't say anything. Just looked at the two of them like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Then, suddenly, the boy's hand slipped. The cup of orange juice tipped over, spilling across the table and onto his lap. The sound of the glass hitting the table made him flinch hard. His body stiffened, his face went white, and he looked terrified, as if he expected to be yelled at. A few customers turned their heads. Before the man could react, Clara quickly grabbed a towel and knelt beside the boy. Hey, it's okay, sweetheart," she said softly, wiping up the mess. "It's just juice. It happens to everyone." But the boy was trembling, his eyes wide. Without thinking, Clara gently put her arms around him and hugged him close. "You're all right. You didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. For a moment, everything in the diner went still. The cook stopped, flipping pancakes. The chatter faded, and even the father froze, his eyes locked on them. The boy stayed in her arms, shaking, then slowly relaxed. After a few seconds, he let out a small sound, a sigh, maybe, or a quiet breath, and his tiny hands gripped the fabric of Clara's apron. When she pulled back, she smiled softly at him. "See? No harm done," she said, and gave him a little wink. The boy looked at her face for a moment longer. There was something different now. His eyes had color in them again, a faint glow that wasn't there before. He didn't speak, but when she stood up and began cleaning the table, he picked up a fork and started to eat. The father sat back, watching, his expression unreadable. He didn't say much during the rest of the meal. When it was time to leave, he quietly paid the bill, leaving a tip that was far larger than usual. Before they walked out, the boy turned back once more. Clara waved at him gently. The boy didn't wave back, but his lips moved slightly. It's almost like he wanted to. When the door closed behind them, the diner slowly came back to life. The cook joked about rich folks finding their way to small diners, and the regulars went back to their conversations. But Clara stood by the window for a moment, watching the car pull away. Something about that boy's eyes stayed with her. She didn't know who they were or where they came from. To her, they were just another pair of customers. But deep down, she felt that their paths had crossed for a reason she couldn't yet understand. And somewhere inside her heart, she hoped that little boy knew, even for a moment, that someone in the world saw him and cared. The next morning, the diner looked the same as always, warm lights glowing through the windows, the smell of coffee filling the air, and the soft hum of chatter from the regular customers. But Clara couldn't stop thinking about the man and the silent little boy who had come the day before. Their faces kept coming back to her mind while she wiped tables and poured coffee. She had seen hundreds of people come and go, but something about that child had touched her heart. She wondered if he was okay, if he ever smiled, or if he even went to school. There was something lonely in his eyes. Something that made her wish she could have done more than just give him pancakes and a smiley face. Just as she was finishing her second cup of coffee behind the counter, the bell over the door jingled again. She looked up, and there they were, the same man in the dark suit and the same small boy clutching the same stuffed bear. For a second, Clara froze in surprise. They had come back. The man nodded politely at her as if it was nothing special. But Clara's heart lifted a little. "Good morning again," she said warmly. "You're becoming one of my favorite customers."
Ow!
She smiled at the boy, but he didn't respond. He still looked quiet and lost, his small hand clutching his bear tightly. Clara led them to the same booth by the window and handed them menus. The father sat down and said in his calm, serious voice, he wanted pancakes again. That made Clara smile. "Well then, pancakes it is," she said, pretending to whisper to the boy. "Don't worry, I'll make sure the chef puts extra love in them today." When she walked away to place the order, she felt the man's eyes following her. There was something softer about him this time. Like the edge of his seriousness had faded just a little. A few minutes later, Clara brought over their breakfast, pancakes shaped like hearts, scrambled eggs, and orange juice. She set the plate in front of the boy and said cheerfully, "Let's see if you can eat more than last time." The boy looked at the food, then at her, his lips pressed tightly together. Clara didn't give up. She leaned on the edge of the booth and whispered, "Do you know a secret?" Pancakes taste better when you smile at them first. She made a funny face and gave the pancake a wink. A few people in the diner chuckled, but Clara didn't mind. She was only focused on that quiet child in front of her. The boy still didn't speak, but something tiny shifted in his eyes, a flicker, a faint light, as if her silly trick had touched something deep inside him. He picked up the fork, poked the pancake, and looked up again. "That's it," Clara said softly. "You're doing perfect." The father watched from across the table. He didn't say a word, but Clara noticed how he stopped checking his phone this time. His attention was fully on his son, something she guessed hadn't happened much lately. After a few bites, the boy suddenly dropped his fork. It hit the plate with a sharp clink, and a few drops of syrup splashed on his shirt. The boy froze, his small shoulders trembling. Clara saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she'd seen the first time when he spilled the juice. She quickly moved closer, lowering her voice so no one else would hear. "Hey, it's okay. It's just a bit of syrup. You know what? Pancakes love messy eaters." She winked and grabbed a napkin, gently wiping his hands. The boy didn't pull away this time. The diner was full now. People coming and going, but for Clara, the world had narrowed to that little boy and his worried face. She wanted him to feel safe, even if it was just for a few minutes inside this small diner. After cleaning up the syrup, she had another idea. She picked up the bottle and said, "Want to help me draw something?" The boy looked up, his eyes uncertain. She smiled. "Come on, let's make a smiley again. You hold it this time." Slowly, the boy reached out his small hand and held the syrup bottle. Clara guided his hand gently, helping him squeeze out a tiny smiley face on the plate. The syrup dripped and spread unevenly, but when it was done, the smiley face looked lopsided and funny. Clara laughed softly. "He looks silly, huh?" For the first time she saw it, the boy's lips moved into a faint, shy smile. It wasn't big, it wasn't confident, but it was real. His little hand trembled slightly as he set the bottle down, but he looked at the plate again and gave the syrup smiley one more quick glance, as if proud of it. Clara's chest filled with warmth. She didn't say anything more. She just stood there, watching as the boy began to eat slowly, one small bite at a time. The father, Mr. Hayes, was still silent, but his expression had changed completely. The tension in his face had melted away, replaced by something softer, almost disbelief. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, she saw emotion in his eyes, gratitude mixed with guilt and sadness. When she went back to the counter to refill coffee for another customer, she caught sight of them again. The father leaned toward his son and said something quietly. The boy didn't answer with words, but he nodded, just a small nod. It was the first communication she'd seen between them. It was a small act, a quiet one, but it carried the kind of magic Clara believed in, the kind that didn't come from money or grand gestures, but from human warmth. A few minutes later, the boy tried to pour more syrup himself. His tiny hand slipped again, and the bottle almost fell, but Clara was quick. She caught it just in time and laughed softly. "Almost lost him. That's okay. We'll call it teamwork." The boy looked at her, and this time, his eyes sparkled with something new, trust. When the meal was over, Clara brought them the bill. The father looked at her for a long moment before saying, "Thank you for everything." His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't used to saying those words. Clara just smiled. "No need to thank me, sir. He's a wonderful boy. He just needs a little kindness, that's all." He nodded, paid the bill, and stood up. The boy slid out of the booth holding his bear tightly. Before they left, he looked up at Clara one more time. She bent down so she was eye level with him and said softly, "You did really good today." The boy didn't speak, but he reached out his small hand and touched hers just for a second. Before walking out with his father, Clara watched them leave, her heart full. She didn't know who they really were or why the man seemed so serious, but she felt something important had happened that morning. She didn't care if the world noticed or not. She had seen a spark come alive in that boy's eyes, and that was enough. When the door closed, the cook called out, "You've got the magic touch." "Clara," she laughed, pretending not to blush. "Nah, just good pancakes," she said, though deep down she knew it wasn't about the pancakes at all. As she cleaned up their table, she looked at the syrup smiley face still on the plate, half melted but still visible. It made her smile, too. Sometimes, she thought, it didn't take much to make a difference, just a bit of time. A little patience, and the courage to care when no one else did. Outside, the black car drove away, but Clara kept watching until it disappeared down the road. She didn't know it yet. But that small act of kindness, the syrup's smiley and the gentle hug, had reached much further than she could imagine. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with soft orange light. When Mr. Hayes sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline through the large glass window, the tall buildings reflected the morning light, but to him, they all looked cold and empty. The city he had helped build, the empire he had created, suddenly felt meaningless. His expensive suit, the polished desk, the silent ticking of his gold watch, all of it seemed to mock him. He had everything a man could want, except peace. And all he could think about was that small diner, that quiet waitress. In the moment she hugged his son, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. His assistant had left a pile of documents on his desk, contracts, reports, investment summaries, but he couldn't focus on a single line. His thoughts kept going back to the same scene. The soft hum of the diner, the smell of syrup, the way his son had trembled when the juice spilled, and the way the waitress Clara had hugged him without hesitation. That image replayed over and over again in his mind, as if his heart was trying to remind him of something he had forgotten long ago. For months, his house had been silent. His son Eli had stopped talking after his mother's death. The boy hadn't smiled, hadn't played, hadn't even looked at him properly. Mr. Hayes had tried everything: child therapists, speech specialists, expensive toys, but nothing worked. Eli would sit for hours in his room, staring at the floor, clutching his mother's teddy bear. The silence had become unbearable. He remembered the night he found Eli crying silently under his blanket. He had wanted to comfort him, to say something, but the words had frozen in his throat. Instead, he had just sat there, feeling helpless. Every time he tried to reach his son, it was like trying to touch smoke. His money couldn't fix this. His power meant nothing in that dark, quiet house. Then came that random morning. He had been driving past the diner on their way to another appointment, and Eli had looked out the window and pointed at the sign. It was the first time the boy had shown interest in anything for months. Mr. Hayes didn't even think, he just pulled over. It was supposed to be a quick breakfast. Nothing more. But fate had other plans. Clara had changed everything in those few minutes. He didn't even know her last name, yet she had done what trained professionals couldn't. She had reached his son's heart. She hadn't treated Eli like a patient or a problem. She had treated him like a child who needed understanding, not instructions. Mr. Hayes remembered the exact moment Eli had relaxed in her arms. The boy's small shoulders had softened, his eyes closing for a moment, as if the weight of the world had lifted. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried something powerful, something real. He hadn't seen his son respond to anyone like that since his wife was alive. That memory filled Mr. Hayes with guilt. He had spent years believing money could solve everything. He had built his life around success, and when tragedy struck, he tried to buy his way through grief. But that hug had shown him something that money could never buy: genuine kindness. He stood up from his chair and walked to the window, staring down at the streets below. Cars moved like small ants, people rushing to work, phones in their hands, faces tired. He saw himself in them all, moving fast, chasing something, but never stopping to feel. He wondered how many of them were just as lonely as he was, surrounded by noise but missing the quiet warmth of connection. He thought of Clara again. The way she had smiled, the way her voice carried calm, even when the diner was noisy. The way she had looked at his son, not with pity, but with love. That small act had done something inside him, too. It had woken something that had been asleep for a long time. His phone buzzed on the desk, dragging him back. A message from his business partner flashed on the screen: "Meeting at 10. Don't be late." He stared at it for a few seconds, then locked the phone again. For once, he didn't care about meetings. For once, he wanted to do something that wasn't about profit or power. He walked to the other room, where Eli sat quietly on the couch, playing with his teddy bear. The morning light fell across the boy's face, and for the first time in months, there was a softness there. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes weren't as empty as before. Mr. Hayes knelt beside him. "Eli," he said gently. The boy looked up, curious. "Do you want to go back to that place?" "The diner." Eli didn't speak, but after a few seconds, he nodded. That small movement made Mr. Hayes's heart tighten. He smiled softly. "Okay, buddy. Let's go." As the car drove out of the driveway, Mr. Hayes watched Eli through the mirror. The boy was still holding his bear, but there was a calmness in his expression. He looked out the window like he was looking for something familiar, something safe. Mr. Hayes's thoughts kept circling around one question. How could such a small act make such a big difference? It humbled him. All his life, people had admired him, feared him, or envied him. But no one had touched his soul the way that one waitress did simply by being kind. When they arrived near the diner, Mr. Hayes told the driver to stop a little farther down the road. He wanted to take a moment before going inside. He looked at the sign again. Sunnyside Diner. It was small, a bit worn out, but it had warmth in it. He smiled faintly. "Dad?" a small voice whispered. Mr. Hayes froze. It was quiet, almost too soft to believe, but it was real. Eli had spoken. Just one word, but it felt like the world stopped moving. He turned to his son slowly. "What did you say?" Eli looked at him, eyes shining, and said again, "Dad." Tears filled Mr. Hayes's eyes. He hadn't heard that word in half a year. He reached out and pulled Eli into his arms, holding him tightly. "I'm here, son," he whispered. "I'm here." In that moment, he understood something. The hug that Clara had given his son had broken the silence that grief had built between them. She had started something that money, doctors, and time coulds. He wiped his eyes and smiled at Eli. "Let's go thank her," he said softly. The boy nodded. As they walked toward the diner, Mr. Hayes felt different. The world around him seemed brighter, the air lighter. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about work or wealth. He was thinking about gratitude. He knew he could never repay that woman for what she had done. But he also knew he wanted to try. He wanted to do more than just thank her. He wanted to change not just his own life, but the lives of others like her. People who quietly made the world better every day without asking for anything in return. As the diner came into view, the smell of fresh pancakes drifted through the air. Eli smiled a real, small smile and squeezed his father's hand. Mr. Hayes smiled back. That one moment, that one connection, had changed everything, and deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning of something bigger, a new chapter not built on wealth or status, but on compassion, kindness, and the simple truth that sometimes the smallest acts can heal the deepest wounds. 2 weeks passed since the morning when Clara last saw the quiet little boy and his serious father. The diner had gone back to its usual rhythm, coffee pots always half full, the smell of butter and syrup in the air, and the same regulars laughing over the same jokes. But for Clara, something had changed. That small boy had stayed in her mind. Sometimes when she poured coffee or wiped a table, she would suddenly remember his big, sad eyes and the small way he had tried to smile before leaving. She often wondered how he was doing, if his father ever noticed the way his son had looked at him that morning. Life at the diner was not easy. Her pay barely covered rent, and her mother's medicine bills kept piling up. Some nights, she sat by the small kitchen table in her apartment, adding up her expenses on scraps of paper and sighing softly. But no matter how tired she felt, she always tried to keep her heart kind. She told herself that kindness was the only thing in the world that never ran out, no matter how much you gave away that afternoon. She had just finished her lunch break when the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached her ears. She looked out the diner's window and saw a shiny black car parked outside. It looked expensive, too expensive for a place like this. At first, she thought the driver might have gotten lost, but then she saw the back door open. A man stepped out in a dark suit, tall and calm, followed by a small boy holding a stuffed bear. Clara's heart skipped a beat. It was them. For a moment, she just stood still, watching through the window. The boy looked different this time. His face wasn't so pale, and his eyes seemed brighter. He wasn't hiding behind his bear. When they walked into the diner, he looked around, taking in the place as if he remembered every corner of it. Clara quickly fixed her apron and tried to steady her voice. "Well, look who's here," she said warmly as they approached her counter. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten all about me." The boy smiled, a small, shy smile, but a real one. It was the first time she had seen him do that. She bent down slightly so she could see him eye to eye. "Hey, sweetheart. You look happy today?" Mr. Hayes nodded politely. "He wanted to come," he said softly. "He's been talking about the lady who made him smile." Clara blinked, surprised. "Talking?" She repeated. "Yes," Mr. Hayes said with a smile that reached his eyes. "He started speaking again a few days ago. Just small words at first, but it's getting better every day." Her hand flew to her mouth. That's wonderful." She looked at the boy again, who was grinning now. "I'm so proud of you, little man." They sat in their usual booth, and Clara brought them pancakes just the way the boy liked them, light, fluffy, and shaped like a smiley face. She didn't even ask for payment this time. Watching him eat happily was enough of a reward as they ate. Clara noticed something else. Mr. Hayes wasn't the same man she'd met weeks ago. His face looked softer, his voice calmer. He wasn't on his phone or rushing through his meal. He laughed quietly when his son made a syrupy mess and even wiped the boy's mouth himself. Seeing them together like that filled Clara's heart with warmth. When they finished, Mr. Hayes stood up and walked over to the counter while Eli played with his bear. "Miss Jensen," he said, using her name for the first time. "I owe you more than you can imagine." Clara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I just did what anyone would have done." He smiled faintly. "That's where you're wrong. No one did what you did. You gave my son something that the world's best doctors couldn't give him." He paused, his voice softening. "You gave him peace." Clara blushed slightly, unsure what to say. "I'm glad he's doing better. That's all that matters." Mr. Hayes nodded slowly. "I didn't come here just to thank you," he said. "There's something I'd like to talk to you about." He motioned for her to step outside for a moment. Curious and a little nervous, Clara followed him. The boy stayed inside, happily doodling on a napkin with a crayon. Outside, the air was cool, and the afternoon sun was golden. The shiny car gleamed by the curb. Mr. Hayes turned to her, his expression gentle but serious. "I never told you who I am," he began. "My name is Daniel Hayes. I own a few companies. You may have heard of them. But lately, I've realized that all the money and power I've gathered mean nothing if I can't use them to make lives better." Clara looked at him quietly. "Unsure where this was going," he continued, "after what you did for my son, I decided to start something new, a foundation in his name. The Eli Hayes Foundation. Its goal will be to help children who struggle with communication or emotional trauma, just like my boy did, and I want you to be part of it." Clara's mouth fell open. "Me?" she asked in disbelief. "But I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about foundations or business." Mr. Hayes smiled. "You know, kindness. You know, compassion. That's what the world needs most. I can handle the business part. You can be the heart of it." She felt her eyes sting with tears. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply, "because what you did came from a place no money can buy. I've already taken care of your debts. Your mother's hospital bills paid in full. I'd also like to offer you a leadership position in the foundation. It's helping us design programs that bring care and comfort to children in need. And if you accept, we'll make sure you never have to worry about rent or long shifts again." Clara was speechless. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at him. "You don't have to do all this," she whispered. He shook his head. "I want to. Because you reminded me what truly matters in life. You reminded me what my wife used to say, that kindness is the only thing that lasts." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the diner and the distant traffic filled the silence. Then Clara took a deep breath, blinking away the tears. "I don't know if I deserve all that, but if I can help even one more child like your son, then yes. I'll do it." Mr. Hayes smiled, a look of deep relief crossing his face. "You already have," he said softly. Just then the door to the diner opened. Eli came running out, his bear in one hand, his napkin drawing in the other. "Look," he said excitedly, his small voice ringing through the air. It was a simple picture, 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. "That's beautiful." "Eli," Clara said warmly. Mr. Hayes looked down at his son, then back at Clara. "He drew us," he said quietly. The moment felt magical. The golden light of sunset wrapped around them, and for the first time in years, Mr. Hayes felt something like peace, a feeling he thought he had lost forever, as the car drove away later. Clara stood outside the diner, still trying to believe what had just happened. Her heart was full, her future uncertain but bright. She didn't know what this new journey would bring. She knew one thing for sure. One small act of kindness had changed everything for the boy, for his father, and for her. Months had passed since that unforgettable day when Clara's life changed forever. The small roadside diner that had once been her whole world was now just a memory she carried with love. Her life looked completely different, no different, but more meaningful than she had ever imagined. Gone were the long, tiring shifts, the endless counting of tips, and the quiet nights worrying about her mother's medical bills. Now, she woke up each morning with purpose. Knowing that her kindness had started, something that touched thousands of lives, she worked full-time at the Eli Hayes Foundation, named after the little boy who had once sat silently at her diner table. The foundation had grown quickly. It was more than just an office or a charity. It was a family for children who had been through pain, or loss, or trauma and needed a voice again. The walls were filled with bright colors, drawings, and laughter. There were playrooms, art classes, therapy spaces, and small corners where children could feel safe. Every day, Clara walked through the halls, greeting children by name, remembering each story. At first, she had been nervous. When Mr. Hayes Daniel had told her she would have a leadership role, she hadn't believed she could do it. She wasn't a professional speaker or a psychologist. She had no fancy degree, no training in managing people, but Daniel had been right about one thing: she had heart. And heart was what the foundation needed most. She learned quickly, surrounded by people who respected her. Whenever she spoke about her experiences at the diner, people listened not because she was rich or powerful, but because she spoke with truth. The first time she gave a public talk for the foundation, she had been terrified. She remembered standing backstage, her hands shaking, thinking about the crowd waiting outside. There were hundreds of people, business leaders, teachers, parents, even reporters. Daniel had been there too, sitting with Eli in the front row. She had looked down at her notes and whispered to herself, "Just speak from your heart. Clara, that's what you've always done." When she walked onto the stage, the lights felt blinding. But she took a deep breath and began. "I used to be a waitress," she said with a small smile. "I didn't have much. Just an apron, a tired smile, and a belief that kindness still mattered." The audience grew quiet. She went on to tell them about the little boy who wouldn't speak, the spilled juice, and the hug that changed everything. Her voice trembled at times, but every word came from her soul. "I didn't plan to save anyone," she said softly. "I just wanted a scared little boy to feel safe. But that small moment taught me something powerful sometimes. One act of kindness can change not just a day, but an entire life." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Daniel stood up first, clapping proudly, his eyes shining with tears. Beside him, Eli clapped too, smiling wide and holding his little bear in one hand. That was the moment Clara realized how far they had all come from a lonely diner booth to a stage filled with hope. After that, everything moved quickly. Donations poured in from all over the country. People who heard her story wanted to help. New centers were opened in different cities, each one carrying the same message, that compassion heals. And wherever she went, Clara never let herself forget where it all began with a single breakfast, a frightened boy, and a hug that came from the heart. Daniel and Eli became like family to her. They visited her often, and sometimes, on quiet weekends, they'd drive back to that same old diner together. They'd sit at the booth by the window, the very spot where everything began. Clara would laugh when the cook recognized her and said, "Well, "If it isn't our miracle waitress?" She'd always smile and reply, "Just Clara, please." Eli had grown taller, his cheeks rounder, his voice stronger. He loved showing Clara the pictures. He drew colorful drawings full of sunshine and people smiling. One day he gave her a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands under a heart. When she asked who they were, he said softly, "You, me, and Dad." That simple answer made her cry. Daniel often watched them quietly, his heart full. He knew that if not for Clara, he might have lost his son completely. The woman who had once served him pancakes had become the person who helped rebuild his family. And she had changed him too. He was no longer the cold, busy man who lived for business meetings and profit margins. He had found joy in giving peace and simplicity, and love in humanity. One evening, as they prepared for the Foundation's first grand charity gala, Daniel came to see Clara in her office. She was sitting at her desk, surrounded by papers, going through a list of children the Foundation had helped that month. He smiled at the sight. She was focused, determined, glowing with purpose. "You've done something incredible here," he said. Clara looked up and smiled. "We did it together," shook his head. "No, you started it. I just followed." They both laughed softly. Knowing that kindness had bound their lives together in a way neither could have imagined, the night of the gala arrived. The hall sparkled with lights, filled with people dressed in elegant clothes, but the atmosphere was warm and full of heart. Clara stood at the front, wearing a simple dress, her hair tied neatly. She wasn't nervous this time. When she looked around, she saw faces she recognized, children from the Foundation, parents, teachers, and of course, Daniel and Eli sitting in the front row. As she stepped onto the stage, applause filled the air. But before she could speak, Eli stood up and walked toward her, holding a small piece of paper. He handed it to her shyly and whispered, "Read it." She unfolded it and smiled. It was a drawing against 2 stick figures hugging in a diner, with a big sun shining above them. Under it, in uneven letters, Eli had written, "Thank you for finding me." Tears filled her eyes. She knelt down and hugged him tightly, whispering, "You found me too." The audience watched silently, moved by the tenderness of the moment. Daniel wiped a tear from his eye as the room filled with quiet emotion. Clara stood up again, holding Eli's hand, and faced the crowd. "Sometimes," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "the world tells us that only big actions matter. But I learned something very different. It's the small things like a smile, a kind word, or a hug that can change everything." Birds hung in the air like soft music. Everyone listened, truly listened, and in that moment, Clara felt that her life had come full circle. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the guests began to leave, Daniel walked up to her and said, "You've changed a lot of lives, Clara." She smiled gently. "So have you? But I think the truth is we all changed each other." She looked around the hall, filled with laughter, joy, and hope. She realized how far she had come from that quiet diner on the highway. Life had once been about survival, but now it was about purpose. She had seen what one act of love could do. It could start a chain reaction that never stopped. Outside, the city lights twinkled and the night was calm. Clara took a deep breath and smiled up at the sky, whispering a quiet thank you. Somewhere in the distance, she could almost hear the sound of a diner bell and smell the sweet scent of pancakes. And in her heart, she knew that kindness, simple, quiet kindness, had truly changed her time on earth forever.